Internet. This is Daniel with Driving and Dragons, and today I'm going to do what I hope is not, it won't be the last, obviously, but hopefully this will be one of the last OGL 1.1 pieces of content that I need to put out for a while. Just like the rest of it, we're kind of getting sick of hearing the same things over and over again. But I'm going to call this the OGL Omnibus, where I just kind of sum up different little pieces and bite-sized chunks of what we've all looked at and effects and that sort of thing. Just kind of a quick primer for anybody who's just now catching up to the situation that's going on with the OGL. And that's what I'm going to do here. See you on the other side. So to kick it off, talking about an OGL Omnibus, let's go over the nuts and bolts and nutshell of the OGL and the OGL 1.1, just so that we're all on the same page. OGL stands for Open Game License. It's closely paired with the SRD, a System Reference Document, which is essentially all the various different D&D rules. And what the OGL does is it allows a creator to freely use intellectual property of Wizards of the Coast outside of a few specifically excluded trademarks to produce their own content, market it as being for Dungeons and Dragons, and to sell it. And it's been a symbiotic relationship. So you don't have to pay any royalties. They can't take it away. It remains your intellectual property. You can produce it. You can sell it. There have been whole companies that have basically come into existence purely because of the OGL. And Wizards of the Coast has benefited because it essentially made hundreds of tiny little playtesters and market tests for Dungeons and Dragons and what does work, what doesn't work, what people want, what people don't want. The 1.1 is an adjustment of that. And the whole crux of the issue is the original OGL was in perpetuity, which means it doesn't end unless revoked. But it was not irrevocable. Irrevocable means that they can't revoke it, they can't take it away from you, but it was not an irrevocable license, it doesn't say. And a lot of case law, if you listen to some of the attorneys out there, most of the case law involving this treats anything that did not explicitly state it's irrevocable as irrevocable. Now, an argument can be, or as revocable. So, case law says revocable, Wizards can take it away. But there's also a lot that gets read into it where it's like, what was the original intent? And they can put the original draft of the OGL and the man who created it up on the stand where he can turn around and say, hey, this was never intended to be revocable. It was intended to be perpetual and irrevocable from the very beginning, because that was not common language when it was written. And a case can be made. But of course the problem is cases cost money. So, what does the 1.1 do that's so bad? For one, anybody who's making money off of it has to, over $50,000, has to report everything they do to Wizards of the Coast, has to provide copies of everything to Wizards of the Coast, has to allow access of everything to Wizards of the Coast, and most importantly, Wizards of the Coast can forever and ever use their intellectual property, the stuff they create, in any way they want to, forever, no royalties, no questions. Wizards can just say, what's yours is now mine, and we're going to use it. And then if you make over $750,000 in revenue, which just means $750,000 passes through the bank account, it's very, very possible to take in $750,000 in actual revenue and still be underwater and still be losing money. But once you hit up $750,000, they start taking a 25% royalty off of it, which means they're taking a quarter of your money once you hit $750,000. And they're trying to play this like, oh, this is only some big companies, because most of us think, oh, $750,000, that's a lot of money. It's really not when you're talking about a business. Even a small plumbing business, like we're talking mom and pop shop, a lot of times they have $1 million plus in revenue, even if they only make $100,000, $200,000 in profit. Because all that cost is covered by your revenue. The OGL, the new 1.1, can also be changed, altered, revoked, or whatever the hell Wizards of the Coast wants to do to it at any point in time. They can take it away. They can take it away from you. They can take it away from other people and let you keep using it. They can change the $750,000 to $10. They can change the royalty from 25% to 50%. And they always can just say, you know what, you're no longer allowed to produce content under this at all, period, end of story, we're taking all your stuff, it's ours now, and that's the end of it. So that's really what the problem here with the OGL is in a nutshell. And so now that we all have kind of a primer on what OGL and OGL 1.1 can do, we're going to move on to a recap of what this means for creators and why it's important for third-party creators, which is kind of some of the obvious stuff. So obviously this is bad for creators. It's bad for creators because up until January 13th, which is when they roll out the new OGL officially, basically you were able to start a business and use Dungeons and Dragons as a vehicle to create to market your business. A lot of people are out there yelling about, oh, we're going to go, we'll do OSR from now on, OSR forever. We'll switch to Pathfinder. We're going to create new systems. We're going to make our own stuff and we're going to make for it. And this won't be the end. The problem with that is, even your big boys, your Paizos, your Cobbled Presses, which Cobbled Presses come out and said, hey, guess what? Black Flag operation, we are making our own game system. The problem is that tons of publishers have done this over the years. Paizo did it when 4th edition came out. They used the 3rd edition OGL to make Pathfinder, which, by the way, is going to be targeted by Wizards. But there's two problems with this. One is your as a creator, they're being forced to either sign on to what Wizards tells them they're allowed to do, or they are forced to operate in a much smaller market. Because at the end of the day, Dungeons and Dragons is the juggernaut. Dungeons and Dragons is well over 50% of the market. Everybody else combined doesn't come close to the player base that Dungeons and Dragons has. And most of their player base also plays Dungeons and Dragons. So now you're fighting over scraps. You're marketing a product to a much smaller niche group than the whole of the tabletop gaming community. And you do have a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, I'll call them purists for lack of a better word, that they only want to run official stuff. They only want to run sanctioned, licensed things. They want to do things like adventure leagues and official play and all this kind of other jazz that Wizards comes out with and only allows for the content that Wizards approves. And some of that may be OGL, some of it may not. Some of it may be stuff that was partnered with Dungeons and Dragons through the OGL or through Dungeon Masters Guild or through some of the other licensing that they have out there. And that goes away. So the likelihood of a publisher being successful, far lower. The cost to acquire customers, far higher. The marketing cost to get your product in front of those far fewer customers, higher. Everything becomes more expensive and less profitable as a result on the third-party market because of this change. That's just the reality of the situation. And you got a lot of people wanting to try and argue about it, try and say that anybody who says it's doom and gloom, but that's not the case. The simple fact of the matter is that is basic business 101. Record labels have done this for a century. Film producers, different copyright management businesses and trademark heavy, IP heavy businesses have done this for centuries. 4 centuries. IP law has been used in this kind of fashion before, and it usually has the same result every time. I'm sure there's some exceptions out there, but those exceptions become the thing you hear about as a hero story because they're exceptions. Normally, the big bad corporation with the $1 billion budget whips everybody's ass. And they win in court. That's it. Once they win in court, it's over. The other thing it means for creators is Wizards is going to go back and start targeting these other publishers that are, quote, going their own way, and they're going to start suing them. And you know what? Maybe Paizo wins. This is one of those murky situations where any lawyer who tells you definitively one way or another needs to be disbarred. Because the fact of the matter is, it is not going to 100% go one way or the other. Wizards could win, their challengers could win. But what they all will tell you, what everyone, whether they think Wizards is going to win or they think Wizards is going to lose, everyone says it's going to take $500,000 or more to find out. Because IP litigation is extremely expensive, and an army of Hasbro lawyers can drag that out. So when Wizards comes down and says, we revoked the old open game license, Pathfinder was made under the old open game license, we are suing Paizo, so Paizo can no longer use anything they ever made or that was derivative of the open game license. Yeah, Paizo may have a case, but Paizo's like a $12 million in revenue company in its best years, and it's going to have to now take a big chunk of that revenue to fight Wizards of the Coast in court. There's a chance it kills Paizo may win a Pyrrhic victory. They may get there in court and get their judgment and win. Huzzah! You can't revoke the old open game license. It's there forever. But Paizo is dead because now they're bankrupt. They're drowned in legal debt. Their sales have slumped off because they had to divert their marketing budget to fight the legal battle. Their game is bad because they had to divert game development money to fighting a legal battle. They have lost tons of products that would have come out, projects that had to be mothballed or shut down because either they were tangential to the OGL and got sanctioned by the courts to be shut down, or at least put on the shelf temporarily, or they had to shut them down because they couldn't afford to fund those projects because guess what? Money was diverted over to fighting a legal battle. And Paizo wins, but they die in the process. And now there's no Pathfinder, and D&D just gobbles up that market share. You know, same thing with Cobbled Press. When Wizards comes in and gets an injunction from the court that says, fine, you may have the right to sell all this stuff that you made before, but until we determine this in court, you're not allowed to sell anything. Meanwhile, Wizards is being backed up by core rule books, Dungeons and Dragons itself, Magic the Gathering, Mr. Potato Head, Monopoly, Star Wars, everything else under the sun. And Cobbled Press is trying to survive off of scraps of stuff they made for, little lesser known RPGs and stuff that has nothing to do with D&D, while the core of their business is held back by an injunction while they figure this out. By the time they even make it to a judge, they're bankrupt. They're gone. They've laid off their entire staff. It's all over. And what's even worse is the tactic will be Wizards will target people who can't fight them first. They'll come to the Driving and Dragons YouTube channel with 16 subscribers. They'll sue me, and I'll be like, I ain't got the money for that. And they'll get a judgment, and my channel will get shut down, and then when they go with Paizo, Wizards of the Coast will show up in court and say, hey, look, you see this? We already had a judge rule that this was a violation of the OGL. Any YouTuber they go after Critical Role, they go after Critical Role with 5 or 6 shut down 20-person YouTube channels, couple hundred YouTube channels, couple thousand subscriber YouTube channels. Guys who aren't even monetized yet are getting liquidated by Wizards lawyers, and they're showing up to fight Critical Role with a stack of litigation. And more than likely, they're not even doing that. They're just going to they're just going to do a digital rights copyright claim against everybody, get them shut down. They're going to go to Drive-Thru RPG and say, hey, you're selling unlicensed material that's in violation, take it down. And Drive-Thru is just going to say, okay, yes, sir, we're going to take it down because we're certainly not going to stick our middle finger at Hasbro and have Hasbro say, well, fine, we're pulling all Dungeons and Dragons, all editions off of your website. You can't do this anymore. They're going to shut you down left and right. Then they're going to go after, then, that's how it works. They'll show up to Critical Role and they say, hey, time for us to have a custom agreement. You didn't sign the custom agreement we gave you before all of this. Now we have all these people we shut down. Now we have definitively determined by suing Driving and Dragons that a YouTube channel that talks about Dungeons and Dragons is a violation of our intellectual property, and we're going to use that and those court judgments and that precedence to shut you down unless you sign this new Better for Wizards of the Coast agreement. That's the kind of thing you're going to see happening because it's happened before in different industries, and anybody who tells you otherwise is simply ignorant to what the reality of the situation is. That is nothing new. It has been done. It has been done to death in this country under this set of laws. It has been done to death in Europe under European laws. It has been done to death for centuries across the globe. It is nothing new that Wizards is doing here. And I guarantee you that their lawyers are 100 times better than Johnny contract lawyer, the family divorce attorney up the street who happens to play D&D, who came out and told you this is 100% unenforceable. There's no way that Wizards can do this. Because the fact of the matter is even if he's right, even if it ends up being ruled as an unenforceable contract, as a bad contract, guess what's going to happen? Wizards going to say, fine, that's the case. Pony up your $500,000 and prove it in court. So that's where we're at with content creators. It's bad. Why should I care if I'm a player? I did a whole video on this because this one pisses me off more than any of them. All these people who want to get on Facebook, on Twitter, on whatever else, it doesn't matter to me. I play pen and paper and I just use my own imagination. It's not going to affect me at all. This doesn't affect players. There's tons of players who don't use any third-party content. This doesn't do us at all. It won't contract the player base. These are the most ignorant comments you're ever going to hear. They really are. And I hate to be super mocking towards these people, but they're starting to wear thin because they've had so many people that are so knowledgeable slap them around with the truth, with historical precedent and everything else, and they just continue to spew the same head in the sand nonsense. Because I think Professor Dungeon Master over on Dungeon Craft said it best. Every contract lawyer, every IP lawyer, every technology person, and every person with a finance degree who has taken a look at this new OGL situation, they all say the same thing and know exactly what Wizards is doing. They've all seen it before. It's Business 101, it's Law 101, both contract and IP. They all say the same thing. Wizards is just going to batter this stuff down. And the business people, like myself, I'm a finance guy, and I'm an economist. That's what my field of study was, economics. And we look back and we see the history, and we know what happens. All right, Wizards of the Coast is the overwhelming market share for players. It also just so happens to be the gateway. If you lined up 1 million tabletop RPG players and asked them what the first role-playing game they played that got them into it was, out of that 1 million players, 999,998 of them are going to say Dungeons and Dragons of some edition. That's just how it is. It's either going to be Dungeons and Dragons or something that would fall under OGL Dungeons and Dragons content, like one of these Dungeons and Dragons spin-offs. I forgot what the one's called, but it's like the Super Rules Like Kids version that was made a while back. Mulvane, I think. But the fact of the matter is that that's what's going to happen. That's the truth. So players are going to leave. You're going to have a lot of bored, short attention span players who don't want to learn how to play 1D&D or don't want to transfer over, and they don't really make their own stuff. They pretty much buy prepackaged adventures and modules and things of that nature. Those are just going to leave the, out of every 100 of them, one of them might go to a new game. The rest of them are going to leave the space. You're going to have some maybe that stick around for Dungeons and Dragons, and they go to one D&D, and they're going to have less content, so they're going to get bored and leave. They're not going to go to other games. They're just going to go play video games instead. They're going to go find something different. So you're going to be left with a small group that stick around. You're also going to see less people coming in because, let's face it, there's going to be less stuff out there. It's going to be more expensive. You're going to have your subscription services and stuff. So Dungeons and Dragons is going to be harder to get into. And since it's the gateway and always has been, it's going to be the thing that ruffles our player base. The market will contract significantly. This happened in 4th edition. When 4th edition came out and got rid of the OGL the first time, the entire industry contracted. Yes, it allowed Pathfinder to come out, and a lot of D&D 3.5 diehards went to Pathfinder. But a lot is not. They lost. We lost more players in the tabletop role-playing game world than were left in it. We lost over 50% of our players when 4th edition came out. It was a massive market contraction. It wasn't this great thing, this great migration where all these players moved to Pathfinder from Dungeons and Dragons and things just shifted. The market contracted, and it will happen again, which means getting new players is going to be that much harder. It's that much more difficult to replace the guy who changed jobs and moved. It's that much more difficult to replace the guy who just had another kid and doesn't have time for it anymore. To replace the girl who got pregnant and is going to be in the hospital for 6 months because it's a complicated pregnancy. Who just lost the girl who, finished her degree work and just got a job as a chief nursing officer, and she's going to be working 80 hours a week. You can't replace these people as easily because there's not as many players out there to do it. And that hurts all of us. Even the guy who is, I still play old editions. We only use our imagination. I'm playing with an old group of friends. It's pen and paper at my kitchen table only. This doesn't affect players at all. No, it doesn't affect a very, very small, minute portion of players. Very, very small. And yes, it hurts all of us because there is less stuff that'll be out, and it's going to be lower quality. You're going to have a loss of diversity in the game as well. And I'm not talking highly weird diversity where we force every table to have, people of different colors and creeds and whatnot. I'm not talking about diversity that doesn't matter. I'm talking about diversity of thought, and diversity of action, and diversity of product. The diversity that matters. In other words, all the options we have as gamers. Because that new supplement that somebody had this great idea to make motorcycle racing combat based on D&D, he can't do his thing anymore. And he doesn't have the resources and money, or let's say it's a big company that's doing this, they have to weigh how much risk there is in putting out the motorcycle racing game off of, is it going to be can it stand on its own? Whereas if it was just an OGL supplement for Dungeons and Dragons, they have a built-in base of people who could buy it and try it out. They could sell it cheaper. They can test it better. You're not going to have that anymore. And the same thing from Wizards, because Wizards isn't going to have, because let's face it, nearly all of these creators are not going to sign on to the 1.1 so that they can just give their stuff away to Wizards. But even if they do have, let's say, 5% of creators, they still only have 5% of their creators doing this. Wizards isn't going to have their test bed for what's going to be popular and what's not going to be popular. So every decision they make is going to be the safe decision. It's going to be the same old vanilla fantasy that we know for a fact we can sell. It's going to be a slight tweak here, a slight tweak there. It's going to be a new coat of paint, but we're not going to rock the boat, because rocking the boat has risk, and that's risk of loss, and that's gone. That hurts the player base. It makes us have a smaller player base that has less options, that has less thought, that has less input from the community, that has less new stuff. And yes, even if you are Mr. Only Homebrew, same group for 10 years, plays pen and paper in person, and that's it. Yes, this hurts you. Not as much as others, but it still does. Wrapping up this little omnibus here on the OGL. The big thing here is that this is very, very bad for the tabletop role-playing game community as a whole. It just is. There's no way around it. To be honest, I think that this is long-term going to be very bad for Wizards of the Coast as well. I think they are losing way too much for what they're going to gain. And for those who think they're not going to gain, I'm going to point this out. Their monetization plans will cover them. Because at this point, and this is from their own internal data as well as just some common sense that we all recognize, game masters spend a lot more money on TTRPGs than players. We just do. We buy more books, we buy more supplements, we buy more adventures, we just buy more stuff. And Wizards' whole scheme has been, how can we monetize the player base? And they're going to do it with the virtual tabletops, charging subscription fees, that little thing. If they lose 2/3 of their player base, but manage to monetize the other third, they're going to come out short term with more profits. And I'm going to tell you why, because it's simple math. As a general rule of thumb, you're going to have about one game master for every 4 to 5 players. Yes, you're going to have some people who run smaller groups, some people who run bigger groups. You're going to have some GMs that run multiple groups. But you're going to average it out to about 4 or 5 players for every game master. So if they lose 2/3, but they monetize those other 4 or 5 people at the player to a greater extent, now they've increased their profit by about 50%, even though the market's contracted. So I don't think they really care if the overall market shrinks. If they can shrink the overall market and more heavily monetize their portion of it, they just will not care. But in the long term, it's going to hurt them. They're going to have less that they can offer everybody, and it's going to hurt them in the long run because they're going to start having players age out. They're going to start having players that have things come up in life that makes them no longer able to play D&D with their friends and that sort of thing. And what's going to happen? Well, the same thing that's happened to the rest of us. We have trouble replacing those players at our table. And while we have trouble replacing those players at our table, they're not going to be bringing anything in new. And what Wizards is going to have is they're going to have less new players coming in because of the higher cost of entry and the higher barriers to entry and the fewer game masters and fewer people that are pushing for people to join the hobby. And they're going to hurt us first. They're going to hurt the community first. But in the end, they'll hurt themselves, and maybe some things will change. But for right now, just remember, Wizards holds a lot of advantages here, and you should care about this, because whatever hurt and harm is done to Wizards by this action is going to hurt the rest of the community more, and is going to hurt the rest of the community first. You need to care about this, even if you're a pen and paper game master running a crew of friends at the table doing nothing but homebrew. You need to care about it. That's all I've got on this. Like I said, it's just a little omnibus to catch everybody up and kind of give everybody a primer for looking at other videos. I'm going to link a ton of stuff from the Rules Lawyer, Professor DM, and other YouTubers who have more expertise and knowledge than I do down below. I encourage you to check them out and get a working knowledge here. But let me know what you think in the comments. I look forward to talking to you guys later and getting back to talking about just tabletop role-playing games. And just so everybody knows, my table, we made the call to switch over to Cyberpunk Red here at our last game session. We finished Tomb of Horrors, and we said, you know what? Instead of D&D, we're just going to play Cyberpunk. See you guys next time.